Welcome back to Racing Rundown's Breeders' Cup Preview Series. I'm Matt Code. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Race 7 at Keeneland this Saturday, and that's the Breeders' Cup Sprint, going 6 furlongs on the main track. This field, of course, headlined by last year's champion sprinter Jackie's Warrior, who could certainly end up as one of, if not the shortest favorite of the weekend. But this is a strong field of 11 horses, so we'll take a look at each one, talking a little bit about their chances in here. And we'll begin with number 1, Manny Wah. Manny Wah, installed at 30 to 1 on the morning line, comes in for Corey Lannery, Wayne Catalano. He did win the local prep, which is the Grade 2 Phoenix, but he ran an 89 buyer doing it. He had a pretty good trip in that Phoenix, and to me, it seemed like nobody showed up in that race. Prior to that, he did run a 95 buyer in the Louisville Thoroughbred Society at Churchill Downs, but again, he saved every inch of ground and got a pretty good trip running fourth. He should be sitting towards the back in here, and he'll try to rally late, but I have a hard time seeing him and making much of an impact just because he's coming off perfect trips and he really hasn't run all that fast. 2 is Kimari for Wesley Ward and Jose Ortiz. She is the only filly in here. She comes out of a pair of pretty fast wins in New York. First, she won the Honorable Miss with a 105 buyer speed figure, and then in her last, she won the Gallant Bloom with a 106. I'm expecting to see her probably on the rail, behind the speed, and trying to make a big run into Jackie's Warrior as they turn for home. I don't think she's quite good enough to beat Jackie's Warrior if the good Jackie's Warrior shows up, but if he doesn't fire, she can find a way to pull this off. So she's one that I think is kind of the alternative to Jackie's Warrior in here, as much as I didn't expect that with her. 3 is Besos, Tyler Gaffley and Greg Foley. He's 20 to 1 in here. Comes off an odds-on victory and a 6 furlong allowance at Churchill. He ran a 91 buyer speed figure in there, which is probably slow. Well, it is slower than he would need to run to win in here. For his career, he's topped out at a 96, but that was earned going 2 turns in the Louisiana Derby of last year. On his form, he seems to be a horse that just hasn't really improved while cutting back in distance, since his figures have dropped a little bit since he started sprinting. He's going to try to make one late run in here, but I have a hard time getting real excited about him just because he hasn't run all that fast since cutting back to sprints. 4 is American Theorem. He's 10 to 1 on the morning line. This gray son of American Pharaoh enters off back-to-back triple-digit buyer performances at Del Mar, including a win in the Grade 1 Bing Crosby. He seems to have really improved quite a bit this summer, and he has a little bit more tactical speed than some of the other deeper closers in this race. His last 2 races make him a contender to at least hit the board in here. That's really as far as I can go with him, but if you don't think Jackie's Warrior is going to show up, he could be a decent alternative. 5 is Aloha West, the defending champion. He won this race last year, but it was with a 100 buyer speed figure, so on the slower end of Breeders' Cup sprints. This year, he's had a pretty hard time stringing his races together. He comes in off long layoff, having not been seen since July. He's only been out 3 times this year, but he has pretty good tactical speed, and he should be able to get first run on the deep closers in here. Throughout his career, he's been a pretty consistent upper 90s buyer type horse. That could be enough to hit the board in here, but I can't really make him a back-to-back winner. 6 is Bill Mott's Elite Power. He's 6 to 1 on the morning line. They paid $900,000 for this Judd Mott colt. He's coming in off his first career stakes win when he won the Vosburg at Belmont at the Big A. He ran pretty well in there. Posted a 101 buyer, but he didn't really beat a whole lot in that field, and he had a pretty good trip doing it. So ultimately, is it possible that a lightly raced horse like this finds a way to hit the board or maybe even win if Jackie's Warrior doesn't show up? Well, sure. But if he ends up as one of the favorites in here, I don't know that he presents that much value if he's underneath a heavy favorite like Jackie's Warrior. 7 is Super Ocho at 30 to 1, probably going to be the longest price in this field. Amador Sanchez brings in a Chilean bred like this off a 3rd place finish in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship, where he did run a career best 93 buyer speed figure. But I really can't see him having any chance in here. He probably has a pace presence and could maybe prompt Jackie's Warrior if Hector Barrios really decides to use him up. But I think Jackie's Warrior can just sit right off of him, and this horse is going to have to get exponentially faster to be a real player in here. A to CZ Rocket, Flavian Pratt, Peter Miller. The old 8-year-old is 20-1 in here, but he's coming out of the Santa Anita Sprint Championship where he ran second, losing by a nose to Howbeit. He ran a 95 buyer in there. At one time, CZ Rocket was among the leaders in this division, and he was a really good horse. But at this point, he seems to have lost a step, and this division has gotten a lot better since the days when it was him and Whitmore running the table. So with CZ Rocket, I respect him for what he once was, but it seems like this is probably too much for him to handle at this point in his career. If he could get back to his good races, maybe. But I have a hard time seeing an 8-year-old like this turn back the clock. And the 9 is the heavy favorite in here, Jackie's Warrior for Joel Rosario, Steve Asmussen. He's 4-5 on the morning line. He's going to go way lower than that in here. He's the defending champion sprinter. He's just been fantastic for most of his career. He did get beat last time in Saratoga's Forgo, but I think he ran quite well in there. Posted his second highest career buyer speed figure with a 109, and isn't 7 furlongs maybe just a little bit further than his ideal distance. But he's been rock solid this year. In his last 4 races, he's posted buyers at or above 105, and he's won them all, except for the Forgo. He should be able to dictate things on the front end in here, but if somebody decided to get brave, he would be perfectly fine sitting off of a horse and just making his run in the turn. He did flop in the Breeders' Cup last year, but he came out of there with a knee chip, so I'm willing to forgive it. But I honestly have a hard time seeing him lose this race. He just towers over this field on the form, and I have to think he's going to fire his A race in here and go on to another champion sprinter title. 10 is Willy Boi, Chantel Sutherland, Jorge Delgado. He was the 3rd place finisher in Jackie's Warriors Vanderbilt at Saratoga, but he's a long shot in here that needs a trip. He ran a 93 buyer in that Forgo, which makes him pretty tough to make for me, but he did run that 99 in Gulfstream Smile Sprint. But again, he got a perfect setup in that race, capitalizing on a pace meltdown and beating what was a pretty subpar group. I won't be totally shocked if he hits the board, but that feels like a bit of a stretch, and he would need quite a few others to not really show up in here. Horse that I think could hit the board at a big price is the 11 Flash of Mischief for Carl Broberg. He's 30-1 on the morning line, but I think he's somewhat interesting. He really improved on the cutback to 6 furlongs in his last race when he won the David Vance at Remington with a career best 104 buyer speed figure. I don't know where that performance came from him, but if he were to duplicate that, he's got a real shot to round out the trifecta here, maybe even run second at a huge price. So looking at my picks in this race, my top pick is going to be Jackie's Warrior. To me, he's just a horse to lean on in the multis. I think he's going to be pretty tough. I'll use Kimari as a very deep backup in here. Underneath, I like 11 Flash of Mischief to potentially hit the board at what could be a pretty big price. But to me, this is just the Jackie's Warrior show in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And that's going to do it for this preview. Stay tuned to Racing Rundown on YouTube for previews of all 14 Breeders' Cup races. And be sure to check out the Racing Rundown podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, good luck if you're playing the races.